Previously on Kentucky Case Files, we walked through the fatal shooting of Joseph Smith and its immediate aftermath. But before we move on, there's been a significant development involving Kentucky State Police Trooper James Cameron Wright, one of the officers involved in this investigation. When Joseph Smith was killed in 2021, Wright participated in the investigation and conducted an interview with Ryan Woodrum that was not recorded. Since we originally began reporting this case, Wright has pleaded guilty in federal court to 2 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law and 1 count of perjury. Now, it's important to note that none of those charges involve Joseph Smith's death or the investigation into it. But because Wright played a role in that investigation and because questions have been raised about investigative decisions made in the case, we felt it was important to update listeners on these developments. Wright faces sentencing later this year and remains suspended without pay, pending the outcome of proceedings involving his employment with Kentucky State Police. Now, back to the Joseph Smith case, Part 2, Anatomy of a Homicide. As police questioned the admitted shooter, Ryan Woodrum, one theme took center stage: self-defense. A lunge, a claimed fear of being overpowered, seriously injured or killed, and officials who recommended no arrest and concluded in their own words that Smith had, quote, made bad choices.
But in any homicide investigation, the physical evidence doesn't have loyalties. It can contradict, it can clarify, it doesn't judge, and sometimes it can expose the gaps in an official story, and those gaps can impact a grand jury's decision. This is Part 2 of the Joseph Smith case, Anatomy of a Homicide. I'm Emily Steele.
And I'm Marcus Roland. And today, we turn first to the autopsy, the toxicology, the bullet trajectories, and whether the physical evidence matches the story investigators accepted the night Joseph Smith died.
Other than photographs, items collected at the scene, and the recorded interviews, the only other clue in this case was the forensic evidence, namely the autopsy.
On March 8th, 2021, 3 days after Smith was killed in the small town of Upton, his body arrived at the state medical examiner's lab in Louisville, 62 miles away. With Smith's body were the clothes he was wearing, including an athletic jacket and pants, t-shirt, and socks with the Joker on them. Also with the body were his belongings: 2 lottery scratch-offs, one of which was a $10 winning ticket, a black dry erase marker, 2 bags of clothing, 3 hairbands on his wrists, 2 earrings in his ears, and since it was only a year into the COVID-19 pandemic, a cloth face mask. According to the report from State Medical Examiner Dr. Donna Stewart, she found 7 gunshot wounds when she unzipped the body bag. Now, 7 wounds do not necessarily mean 7 bullets. The type of gun Woodrum used expels empty shells after each shot, and only 5 bullet casings were recovered and photographed by police, all of them inside the SUV. We contacted the medical examiner's office to discuss the findings, but received no response. According to the report, there was no soot or stippling on any of the wounds, meaning there were no marks or gunpowder residue indicative of a close-range discharge or contact shot.
Of the 7 wounds, Smith had a grazing wound on the back of his head, a wound near his left jaw that exited near his right jaw, and 2 wounds to his upper right arm. Most important, there were 3 wounds on the left side of Smith's body. They indicated that the bullets traveled upward and to the right, across the torso, piercing his lungs, heart, spleen, and stomach, and terminated or exited higher up on the right side of Smith's body. Now, Marcus, the trajectory evidence seems consistent with Woodrum's explanation that Smith was turning away when he fired those shots. Do you think any of that autopsy evidence, either the position of the wounds or the lack of soot or stippling, do those give us any insights to connect to Woodrum's story that Smith was lunging at him?
Well, that's a good question. Smith's family is pretty much of the opinion that there was no lunge. That's their view based on what they knew about Joseph. But when I listened to the statement from Woodrum that he gave to the state police, it seems more consistent with his very own words that Joseph was turning away. Because there's one, and we'll talk about this later, there's one passage of his statement where he doesn't even mention the lunge.
At a minimum, from the lack of evidence of kind of close range or contact shots, that there had to have been some distance, even if we're not sure who was facing what direction.
Sure.
To have been some distance between them, right?
Right. I think we mentioned earlier that the shell casings were inside the truck, which kind of, and we should offer the caveat that we are not
forensic
gunshot experts. We're not forensic scientists or autopsy experts in any shape or form. But we're struggling through what the Smith family struggles through in looking at this evidence and trying to put it all together, and it just doesn't always seem to fit the way they think it should fit.
Yeah. So it does, even with the information about the placement of the wounds, maybe we still have some questions about exactly what transpired during that shooting.
Yes. During the autopsy, the medical examiner also looked at the body's organs and at blood, hair, and fingernail samples to understand what substances were present in the final hours of life. Blood toxicology testing showed that Smith had amphetamines and methamphetamine in his system at the time of death. Smith's family says he lived a troubled life. He was effectively experiencing homelessness at the time of his death and couch surfed from friend to friend. He had, of course, allegedly just stolen a vehicle, and not for the first time. And he allegedly used illicit drugs, including meth.
Toxicologists caution that meth levels in the blood cannot reliably predict impairment, yet the drug's presence can powerfully shape a jury's perception. The word alone can shape how we picture someone, with the slightest mention of the drug conjuring scenes of a psychotic person capable of anything. The toxicologists have warned for years that meth doesn't work like, say, alcohol, where the more you have in the system correlates to your level of impairment. According to research published in forensic toxicology literature, there's no universally accepted number for the amount of meth in the bloodstream that proves impairment. Some people with low levels appear severely affected. Some with higher levels do not. This is important because Assistant Commonwealth's Attorney Chris McCrary, who handled the Smith case, told Kentucky Case Files that the meth finding would have presented a difficulty in convincing a jury that Smith wasn't behaving in a normal way. McCrary, who declined to be recorded, said a person on meth, quote, can be really scary, suggesting this might have given Woodrum a reason to be afraid for his safety. But according to official reports, Woodrum never described Smith as behaving violently, irrationally, or out of control.
Over 3 months after the autopsy was concluded, the case was finally presented to a Hardin County grand jury. Usually, grand juries convene more often, but McCrary said the delay was attributed to COVID-19. This was spring of 2021, remember, and usual procedures were disrupted.
When McCrary presented the case, he submitted only one charge, the difficult-to-prove charge of murder. No lesser offenses such as manslaughter in the first or second degree or reckless homicide were formally offered. We asked McCrary about the decision not to instruct the grand jury to consider those lesser offenses. He said that while murder was submitted to the jury, all the lesser included offenses were part of that instruction. He said the grand jury, quote, had the law, meaning that when a prosecutor submits a murder charge, the grand jury considers everything under the umbrella of murder and can ask questions.
We talked to Lexington attorney Russ Baldani about that. He was not involved with this case, but with 42 years of experience as a criminal defense attorney, he is familiar with standard courtroom practices. He confirmed that it is not unusual for a prosecutor to file murder charges and not specifically delineate other charges that fall under that umbrella.
It seems like the general principle is a prosecutor is not legally obligated to offer lesser offenses to a grand jury. I've seen cases in Kentucky or in Fayette County I'm thinking more along the lines of probably vehicular homicide cases that have some extenuating or questionable circumstances in which a charge is presented to a grand jury and they opt for a reckless homicide or a second degree manslaughter. So I get the impression that at least in Fayette County, when there's a murder charge presented to a grand jury, I assume and expect that the grand jury is aware that they could return an indictment upon a lesser charge.
Either way, the grand jury did not tender an indictment on any charge, murder or otherwise. Baldani stressed that there's not a lot of transparency with grand juries, which are comprised of an anonymous set of local residents and meet in secret.
Defense attorneys are notoriously skeptical. They believe that, for the most part, that if a prosecutor wants an indictment, they're going to get an indictment. If they don't want an indictment, then one is extremely unlikely to be returned. Now, prosecutors, as a general rule, they maintain that the grand juries are independent and do their own thing. But I think the fact of the matter is, that's borne out by lots of cases, is if a prosecutor wants an indictment, they're almost certainly going to get one. But on the other hand, sometimes prosecutors use grand juries kind of as cover. There could be a controversial case in which the prosecutor is a little skeptical if they want an indictment. And if a grand jury an anonymous grand jury hears testimony and they don't return the indictment, the prosecutor can say to the public, hey, I presented the case and citizens heard the evidence and decided that there wasn't probable cause to return an indictment. So sometimes it can give the prosecutor cover. Now, what happens, the legal discussions between the prosecutor and the grand jury are not recorded or presented to the defense. So it's not clear what goes on behind closed doors.
Regarding the grand jury, Smith's family members said they also wonder whether local Moors in a small gun-friendly community where self-defense is a concept more broadly embraced shaped attitudes about justification, and further whether Woodrum's local reputation as an upstanding young man or Smith's criminal history and drug issues could have influenced investigators or grand jurors toward accepting Woodrum's self-defense claim. On this latter point, Smith's cousin Keisha Hendricks said,
So I worked for a nurse practitioner that knew Ryan's family. And the Monday or Tuesday after it happened, I go to work and I don't know how it came up, but I was in her office and she was like, well, Ryan comes from a good family. They're very well known around the community and they do a lot. And at that point, I was like, stop talking to me about it. I don't want to hear nothing. So that told me that his family has ties in the community.
and indeed, perhaps societal views and reputations are the reason the prosecution and police didn't continue investigating the case after the autopsy. And it might explain the grand jury's choice not to charge Woodrum. We will likely never know the answers to those questions and many more. After the grand jury was dismissed, the Joseph Smith case was essentially closed.
What we've heard so far is a sequence of decisions, some made in seconds, others made in silence. An armed man who may or may not have been the initial aggressor, an unarmed man shot multiple times while turning away from the shooter, an unrecorded interview between a trooper and a man he personally knew, no arrest, no charges, and autopsy findings that raise still more questions about what happened on March 5th. Join us next time when we explore specific questions about the shooting in the Joseph Smith case, Part 3, A Mountain of Questions. I'm Emily Steele.
And I'm Marcus Roland. Thanks for listening to Kentucky Case Files. Make sure you like and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Sourcing for this podcast includes our original reporting and interviews, Kentucky State Police records, and the State Medical Examiner's autopsy report obtained through the Open Records Act, forensic toxicology research, and news reports from the Elizabethtown News Enterprise, WTVQ, WLKY, WLEX, WBKO, and WDRB.